Hello, I'm Jeffrey Williams, and welcome to Too Late for the Gods. I recently did a video responding to Braxton Hunter's channel posing 10 questions to atheists. He has just released another video responding to some of the atheist responses to his first question of those 10. In this video, we'll look at his response to me. Notice how he begins the evasion of his equivocation with the condescending statement that I'm starting to get it here, to obscure the problem that invalidates his own question. The issue he refuses to address is the insignificance of merely accounting for relevant facts versus limiting explanations to what we actually have evidence for. This requires a questioning of the validity of metaphysical speculation that apologists are rarely equipped to perform. Here, I will more explicitly make a distinction I assumed in my prior video between philosophy and apologetics. The defining activity of philosophy, and science for that matter, is to question the nature of reality and man's place in it. This questioning includes challenging the prior assumptions that have led to previous understandings of reality and man. It is a rigorous striving for truth, wherever that might lead. Apologetics is exactly the opposite. The defining act of apologetics is the selling of a product, an act that abjures the questioning of its underlying principles and open search for truth in favor of propagandizing to convince others that Christianity already embodies this truth. Apologists mostly learn canned arguments and responses. In his response, Brax displays the confusion and emotionality that often ensues when they encounter something outside of their scripts. The curriculum of apologetics has two main components: the arguments for the existence of God and defense of the Bible and Christian dogma. The arguments for God are familiar to most of us and generally have their origins in medieval metaphysics. They were decisively shown to be fallacious centuries ago, and our current understanding of physics has done great damage to many of their premises. Yet apologists blithely continue in this nonsense, either unaware or refusing to acknowledge that the foundation of these fallacious arguments rotted away long ago. Their understanding is stunted by a lack of any real study of philosophy or science. Their education appropriates certain philosophical terms dating back to an obsolete metaphysics, but with no real deep inquiry into their meanings, context, or validity. The apologist's familiarity with philosophers is typically limited to a superficial encounter with Aristotle, maybe a little Plato, Aquinas, maybe a little Descartes, Plantinga, if we generously include him among philosophers rather than apologists, and other minor figures toiling in the backwaters of philosophy of religion. They are generally ignorant of Enlightenment philosophy and the major trends since then, which have undermined and finally rejected metaphysics as illusory conjecture with no compulsion. When we confront them with Kant's epistemology, which demonstrates that true knowledge can only be gained through the senses, or Kant's first antinomy in the Critique of Pure Reason, which negates many of the premises in their arguments for God, typically they either facilely dismiss Kant while showing not the slightest understanding of his thought, or they strawman Kant, as William Lane Craig is wont to do. Here is Brax's first part of his response to me.
All right, let's move on. And here, actually, I'm going to let Jeff Williams respond. Jeff Williams, this is an interesting one. This guy, this guy has been absolutely persistent. Bless your heart, Jeff. Every time I tweet anything, he posts a link to this. Every time, it's all over the place. He wants people to see this video. And so I made actually a response to his video back when he first released it, just for my patrons, not because I didn't want atheists to see it, but because at the time I wasn't sure whether I even wanted to make response videos to this. And I wanted to see whether my patrons, most of whom are Christians, thought that it would be helpful. But I actually have a recording of that, and I want to go ahead and release my answer to him here. So you're going to see the older background here from me, but here's the answer. I still stand by it.
This is a fuzzy question resting on possible equivocation of the word explain. One can contrive a story that takes into account all relevant facts, but is that what we generally mean by explanation? Or does explanation require objective evidence to actually explain how something comes about? Certainly, various ancient myths explain creation and cosmic evolution in the former sense, but do we give them the same seriousness as cosmology based on the laws of nature following the Big Bang?
Okay, now see, he's starting to get it here. Here what he's saying is, he's like, look, yes, even some ancient myths, like aside, let's put Christianity aside for a minute. Some of these ancient myths, yeah, they do account for some of these things, but they don't account for it as well as some of these other things. That's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to say. We're saying, let's take a fact that we agree about. I still haven't heard one yet. And let's figure out which worldview explains it better. If you think that because of science and some of these things, Christianity doesn't account for origins or whatever better, then make that case. But we're looking for facts you and I agree are real facts about the way the world is, that your worldview makes better sense of than mine. And we're going to see if we hear any of those.
Here we see Brax continue in that evasion. The issue I raised was whether a metaphysical assertion of God is a legitimate explanation of the physical world. As Bertrand Russell showed in his famous teapot example, metaphysical explanation, untethered to reality, is able to continually shapeshift to evade any objection or contradiction. Non-metaphysical inquiry, such as science, enjoys no such luxury and can only explain according to objective facts from the sensible world. The forced discipline, however, results in a theory of reality grounded in immutable facts and disallows the fanciful inventions of the metaphysician in what Hume called fairyland. The point of this is that we cannot answer Brax's question of what issue a non-theistic framework accounts for better than Christian worldview until we clarify the meaning of accounting for. Is it merely an invention that covers all elements, or is it limited to physical evidence? Going back to Brax's initial condescension, either Brax doesn't get it yet, or he is intentionally obfuscating. Do we think a claim that a metaphysical creator created light, the earth, and water before he created the stars to be the equal of an explanation that says gravity pulled together hydrogen atoms, which coalesced into stars that, through nuclear fusion, formed heavier elements, which dying stars spewed into space, and which themselves coalesced through gravity into planets?
Okay, now see what he's done here. The other day, when I was talking about Jordan Peterson, I pointed out that much of atheism today sounds like a 13-year-old atheist boy angrily railing against fundamentalist Christianity.
Another evasive trick Brax often employs is personal belittlement in place of argumentation. I will put my 13-year-old angry boy level of scientific understanding against Brax's understanding anytime he would like.
Well, I'm actually sympathetic to a young earth creationist reading of Genesis 1, but it's not my understanding. And I actually think he's created a false dichotomy here. The idea that Christians can't believe that what he just described is how matter coalesced into stars and then planets formed. It's exactly what I believe, and I'm a Christian. So that's not a count for you. It's not a count for me. I'm sorry, that's not a point for you. That's not a point for me. That's just a point, right? That's not, you don't get to hug everything that science discovers to atheism as though atheism is the only answer for those things, or as if science is the purview of atheism.
This is far less of a point than Brax imagines. His rejection of the creation myth of Genesis for a modern scientific understanding only illustrates the implausibility of the biblical account and dilutes the meaning of being a Christian. Hunter asks us to answer according to our own personal worldview. Okay, I would characterize mine as non-reductionalist physicalist, whose approach primarily takes on a Heideggerian inquiry into being.
By the way, he answers the rest of the questions much more quickly than he does this one.
So what does that really mean? First of all, it means I reject anything beyond physical reality on the grounds of lack of evidence and the limits of human epistemology to ever know such a thing. Second, it means that I respect science within its proper limits, but believe aesthetic knowledge can lead to deeper truth. The last scene of Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov can teach us far more about morality than all the systematic philosophies ever devised. Most importantly,
I love Dostoevsky, but that's just false.
Means that I'm
the last part of Brothers Karamazov teaches us more about philosophy. He said systematic philosophy, okay, than any other philosophy book ever could. Are you kidding me?
What is just false, and in what way? As we see, Brax doesn't even understand the point he facilely dismisses as false. Brax's failure to grasp the concept is far more serious than I would have expected, or he is willfully inverting what I said. Nowhere did I say that the last scene of the Brothers Karamazov teaches us about systematic philosophy. In fact, quite the opposite. In the charitable assumption that this point was simply beyond Brax's grasp, I will try to simplify this for him. I had explained my worldview as non-metaphysical and aesthetic, which happens to be the two major trends in philosophy over the past 250 years. The point about Dostoevsky was that his aesthetic creation gave us a far more profound encounter with an understanding of morality than any non-aesthetic approach could, such as systematic philosophy. Aesthetics is always a recreation of the sensible, which is our only true source of knowledge. Had Brax bothered with Hume, Nietzsche, and Heidegger, for example, he would have at least recognized the issue, if not agreeing with it. But as I said, apologists only have a pretense of studying philosophy. Comfortable with mystery and uncertainty. In fact, I'm skeptical of any worldview that claims to answer everything. The world is endlessly...
Okay, so he's saying, look, I reject all supernatural stuff, and I'm not saying I can answer stuff. Okay, that's fine. But if we're doing worldview analysis, we're saying we got a fact here that you and I both agree is real, like the universal claims of religious experience and things like that. Then that's a fact. Like, he may not agree that supernatural stuff is happening, but the fact that that is a universal claim from every culture. Now, again, remember, if you're new to this, cumulative case apologetics, this is not me. I wouldn't use this as an argument in itself, like in a syllogism. I'm just throwing out a fact that we both agree is true and say, does that sit better on my worldview or yours?
Brax is implying that since religion is common among all cultures, this argues toward its legitimacy, which ignores that superstition and murder are also common among all cultures. The religions of these cultures irreconcilably conflict with each other, and Western culture is quickly rejecting religion. He then appeals to a cumulative case apologetics, which is just one more attempt to diminish criteria for truth by ignoring the validity of each accumulated item. If we were to go to court with a mountain of evidence that was inadmissible, we would accumulate nothing at all. This brings us directly back to the initial question I raised that Brax continues to avoid, the question of admissibility of claims. This raises the issue of Reformed apologetics as the umbrella for the attempt to lower the bar for acceptance of evidence, which I have addressed in other videos.
Well, everyone, every culture in the world claims that they've had supernatural experiences. Okay, that makes much more sense on Christianity than it does on yours. And if it makes better sense on yours, if you can explain that anthropologically, naturalistically somehow, then give that to us. But if you're not going to give that to us, I'm sorry, that's a point in favor of Christianity until you explain how yours accounts for that better.
That's only a point in favor of Christianity if we ignore my initial criticism of the question. I have a suggestion. In this video, Brax offers to come on my channel. I propose we set a date to do that and discuss two items. First, the validity of a metaphysical answer such as Christianity. Second, inquiry into one fact and which approach best describes it. It could be how we explain the appearance of religions among cultures, including the supernatural. I only insist that we first explore the question of metaphysics before we move to the second question. It's the draw of this mystery that unites physicists, philosophers, and poets in search of truth.
Santi, I'd love to come on your channel and talk about the Kalam.
In his own way. If there were such a thing as sin, it would be to decolor that rainbow mystery with false images of ghostly, otherworldly shadows.
Okay, let's take this as one of his reasons, because it's all I have to work with. Sin. The idea of sin. On atheism, we realize that there isn't anything like sin. It's unlikely there's a thing like sin. You guys think there is something like sin. Okay, yeah. What makes better sense of the way the world is on the question of evil and sin between atheism and Christianity? Is there even a question? On atheism, nothing is evil. The Holocaust wasn't evil. Pol Pot wasn't evil. None of it was evil. If someone rapes and murders children, it's not evil. Christianity says that's evil, and we can account for that. That's not a point for you. That's a point for us.
This is one of the most egregious and offensive examples of straw manning I ever encountered. There are, in fact, understandings of morality among atheists which are far more grounded than the primitive and crude morality of the Bible. This is another thing I would be happy to discuss with Brax here on this channel. Again, he either sadly failed to understand my point about Dostoevsky or is scurrilously misstating my point. This physical universe in which we dwell will never be ultimately explained, and we will...
Drew, I'd be happy to go on your show too. I love that topic.
And will offer all the mystery we can ever handle. We need not create stories of non-existent miracles from another realm.
I agree. We don't need to create those stories. We need to find out, are those stories true? But that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you a very simple question. I won't say it again.
Physicality is a brute fact.
Okay, he's talking about all we don't know. We don't know this. We don't know that. I reject supernatural claims. But physicality is a brute fact, by which I think he means that physical stuff is all there is. You just spent so far this whole video telling me how much we can't know and how much we ought to love and expect mystery. And now you're going to tell me, but one thing I do know, it's a brute fact, is that there's nothing supernatural and physical is all there is. Unbelievable.
Another crude distortion of what I said. I said that physicality is a brute fact, which means it is a true ground of knowledge. It is the only one we know exists. His emotional reaction to that reveals his insecurity over the inability to establish the reality of anything beyond the physical. My position is, since we do have the brute fact of physicality and no other brute fact, then that is the appropriate ground for inquiry. It's a fool's game to look beyond it. Everything we can know will be found right here.
I'll come on your channel. I'll come on all your channels. Went on a guy's channel yesterday, and I didn't even know him personally. You guys are patrons. I'll be happy to go on your channel. I would have gone on your channel anyway, even if you weren't. All right, let's go.
While I freely admit my worldview leaves much unexplained, I am certain Christianity explains nothing at all.
Christianity explains nothing at all. We're not asking whether you think it's true so that you can then say, since I don't think it's true, it doesn't explain anything. We're saying, what does it account for? What if it were true, would it match what we see in reality? Would it explain the data? We're saying yes. We're saying atheism doesn't. And I take this as a concession that he doesn't know. I take this as a concession that no, there's lots of stuff we don't know on our worldview, and I don't know of anything Christianity can account for. Drew says, what I think he's saying, for some reason I can't add that to the broadcast. What I think he's saying is that as an atheist, he's skeptical of everything, and his worldview accounts for what we don't know. His worldview accounts for what we don't know. Well, the things that we genuinely don't know, I think Christianity accounts for that too.
Another straw man. I say there are things we can know and much more that we cannot. Christianity is a primitive and childlike attempt to answer what we don't yet or can never know. Interestingly, Brax actually articulates this difference between merely including answers to all questions in a story versus limiting what we claim to know to be brute facts and acknowledge the unknowable. I would love to discuss with Brax what validity he has for metaphysical assertion before we can enter his claims as admissible evidence.
Joseph says, I'll start a channel just to invite you on. Let's do it, Joseph. But if the things that we don't know, Christianity accounts for that too. It's not like, and atheists make this mistake all the time, if there's a God, he should have explained to you everything about himself in detail, and you should have answers to everything, including why every instance of evil happens and all this kind of stuff. Now, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, but on Christianity, we wouldn't expect to know everything. I mean, I don't know.
As Brax becomes more emotional, he also becomes more incoherent. Just minutes ago, he claimed that Christianity explains everything. He said that explicitly. And now here he says there are a lot of things we don't know. This seems to be leading to the fallacy of God of the gaps. Whatever we don't know, it must be God.
I don't know. Let's keep going.
Morality is better explained through evolution and an ontological questioning of man's nature manifest in our innate sense of morality, a sense of...
Okay, I believe we have an innate sense of morality, and if I were a theistic evolutionist, I would say yes. The way we learned about morality was through herd development and all those sorts of things. I'm not a theistic evolutionist, but the thing that's interesting here is this is the typical thing about, are we talking about moral epistemology or moral ontology? He's talking about how we came to understand and know about morality and what the moral truths are. Yeah, we learned about mathematics in a similar way. That doesn't mean that there aren't mathematical truths that were true before we discovered them. And so what if you can explain the epistemology, like how we came to learn moral facts, great. That's not a point for you or a point for me. That's just a point. What you can't account for is moral ontology. You can't account for the objective, ultimate nature of morality. And I think he, as many would say, is, yeah, I don't think because I don't think it is objective. Okay, well, now that's the point where, now we're at a point where you have a lot you cannot account for. Because you can't, and it's amazing to me that atheists like Scholar Fiction will flatly admit, yeah, there's nothing ultimately wrong with raping and murdering a baby. But you know what? I think it's wrong. In my opinion, it's wrong. What does it even mean to say, in your opinion, it's wrong? All you're saying is you don't like it. If somebody else does like it, you can't say they're wrong. You can just say you don't like what they like. But we all know that's not true. And universally, people don't live and act that way. And Christianity makes better sense of that fact. He's stumbling all over himself. Did I bring up? Yeah, maybe I did bring up morality.
I was in fact making an epistemological point, which is that we have an innate moral sense, a sensibility. That means it is by definition not objective or given through moral law. That doesn't mean there isn't a grounded morality that guides us, however. Again, were he literate enough to have read Hume, Nietzsche, or Heidegger, he would have at least recognized that. The ontological question is not one I needed to address on that video, but would be happy to discuss in the next video with him. My approach is that the ontological locus of morality would be found in our own essential human nature as instances of the essential physical being that spawned us. Anybody who claims to know the true nature of morality itself is a charlatan or a fool. As Heidegger said, we don't yet even know the right questions to ask. Clearing out the remaining metaphysical detritus is a necessary task in preparing the ground for that inquiry.
All right.
Objectively see refined over the millennia. The claims of the supernatural are better explained by psychologists. Free will remains an open question.
Wait, he just brushed over that. The supernatural is better explained by the psychologists? Well, now who's equivocating on explained by? Psychologists can explain what they think the supernatural is. You didn't tell us what that was, so I can't evaluate what you think about that because you haven't explained it to me.
Yes, as a psychological phenomenon of faulty interpretation of reality and why that occurs, which, if it exists, might eventually be explained through quantum mind theory.
Yeah, free will. He says if it exists, it might be explained by quantum mind theory. So now I agree. It might be, but here's and I'm actually open to that. And I raised it in my debate with Dan Barker, but that was only because I wanted to. I was trying to show him that even naturalistically, science hasn't ruled this out. But you understand? Go back and watch the debate with Dan Barker if you want to get more on this. But if if quantum mind theory is true, the design in it, the teleology in it, I submit, is so intricate that it matches anything that's amazing about design in any design argument in the world. It would be so unlikely that I would think it would alone count as a reason to believe God.
I have written extensively on the faulty reasoning and misuse of probabilities in intelligent design. Some of this is available on my blog, toolateforthegods.com. I would especially recommend my essay on fine-tuning and illusion and my critique of William Lane Craig's attempt to refute that essay. I provide the links below. So let me repeat my proposal to Brax. Let's explore the validity of metaphysical explanation, and then let's take one fact and compare explanations. It could be the phenomenon of religion throughout cultures, morality, or intelligent design. Your pick.